One of the foundational case studies of geopolitics is the Peloponnesian Wars, the 431 to 404 BCE conflict between the Greek city-states of Athens, Sparta, and their allies over the entirety of Hellas and the eastern Mediterranean. The account of the wars by the Greek historian Thucydides has given scholars and statesmen much to ponder: internal politics, foreign interference, military strategy. But one question above all others has captivated classicists and political scientists alike. Why did Athens lose, and why did Sparta win? The answer touches on alliances, economics, geopolitics, and the fragility of democracies under pressure. Welcome to our video on the Peloponnesian War. History like this is to us practically just a story, but if historians are at all to be trusted, at least some of this did happen to real people. And we want to get you connected with that reality via a special offer from our sponsor today, Kinza Coins. This is an ancient coin emporium, and there is no better or easier way to connect to history than by holding in your hand the real coins those people held every day. Whether you're new to ancient coins or need an elite piece for your collection, Kinza has a diverse range of fully NGC-authenticated artifacts, preserved for thousands of years and now available for history lovers like you. You can explore their beginner's range to get started, and always rest assured that if any coin is found to be fake, you get full lifetime refund coverage. And don't stop there. Dive into the history behind these coins and explore the world of ancient coin collection with Kinza's Ancient Coin Hour podcast. Collect history, understand history, and connect to the past at surprisingly low prices with Kinza Coins. As for the special offer, use code KINGS and GENERALS for 10% off. Get started via the link in the description. The first factor which seems to have tipped the balance in the Peloponnesian Wars is that of alliances. Both Sparta and Athens had their own alliances of city-states and colonies who fought in the wars. Sparta had the Peloponnesian League, while Athens had the Delian League. In Sparta's case, while they were the leaders of the Peloponnesians, they were not the only ones monopolizing its institutions. Another powerful city was Corinth, who in 432 BCE had come into conflict with Athens over Potidaea, one of their colonies that Athens sought to bring under tighter control. It was this battle that caused Corinth to demand Sparta declare war on Athens, which ended up happening after a fierce debate in the Laconic city. Athens, for its part, was the main power of the Delian League, and was often rather overbearing towards its allies. The Athenians had initially founded the League as a means to liberate Ionian cities from Persia in Asia Minor after the Greco-Persian Wars, and had slowly taken over its finances for personal aggrandizement. Thus, an inequality emerges in the two alliances. One was multipolar and the other was unipolar. Sparta and its Corinthian allies had combined powers which complemented each other militarily. Sparta was, at least at the start of the Peloponnesian Wars, better at land warfare, whereas Corinth was better in naval battles. Athens' allies were usually smaller cities, and more of them were island polis. Thus, Athens only really dominated in naval warfare, with the exception of a few allies who could help them in land battles. In addition, there were some issues in the animosity within alliances. Both the Peloponnesian and Delian Leagues had dissident members, or members who had changed their forms of government between oligarchies and democracies. These political and opinion changes were key in changing the coherence of the alliances. However, Athens had more issues within its alliance throughout the war. As Thucydides notes when describing the start of the war, while Sparta had officially launched the war, many cities in Hellas were sympathetic to its complaints that Athens was becoming overbearing and imperialist towards other Greeks. As a result, there were many people, even in Athenian allied states, who thought Athens was more trouble than it was worth. The main way for Athens to influence and destabilize the Peloponnesian League was through sponsoring pro-democracy movements in cities run by oligarchs. They tried to do this in 424 BCE, when the Spartan ally of Megara had become democratic and wished to break off from Spartan influence. However, the Spartans and the Peloponnesians found many more instances where they could use Athenian brutality as propaganda against them. The failed expedition in Sicily in 415 to 413 BCE, or the sack of Melos in 416 BCE, were examples of Athenian chaos that Spartans could point to in order to discredit the city of Athena. This was not always successful as a strategy, but it is certainly the case that Athenian arrogance caused them many alliance problems. No betrayal or campaign, not even the Sicilian Expedition, were nails in the coffin for Athenian imperialism, but they certainly undermined the alliance and the prestige that Athens had held as liberators of Asia Minor. Another factor which likely determined the outcome of the Peloponnesian Wars was that of economics. Wars are more often than not won on the budget papers rather than the battlefields, with logistics and the ability to sustain oneself and replenish losses being key for opening the lock of victory. In this instance, Athens' economic might was sort of a double-edged sword. One typical strategy the Peloponnesians used during the war was to raid Attica, the part of Hellas where Athens is located, almost every year. They then pillaged and burned the fields surrounding the city in order to starve them out. The reason why Athens lasted so long was that it had the economic might to sustain logistical strains like this. The Athenian Empire, which was essentially what the Delian League was, included regions that could sustain the Athenian people and their army for decades, like the region of Thrace. There, a variety of colonies and mines provided much-needed revenue for purchasing grain. The Athenians also had continuous access to the Straits of the Bosporus, where grain imports from the Scythians of the Black Sea supplied their war effort. The Athenians thus could manage to survive immense blows, like the Sicilian Expedition, thanks to this economic capacity. The Spartans tried twice to cut off Athenian control over this region. Once in the campaign of the Spartan general Brasidas, who captured Amphipolis in 424 BCE, a blow that contributed to the Peace of Nicaeus in 421 BCE, ending the Archidamian phase of the war. The other time was in the Battle of Aegospotamoi in 405 BCE, in which the general Lysander defeated the Athenians and cut off their grain supply. Thus, only when Athenian food supplies were disrupted did the Thessalocracy buckle into defeat. The Spartans also had their own economic capacities upon which they relied for victory. Unlike the Athenians, who often took bold military and budgetary measures during the war, the Spartans were more conservative in their tactics. Only a few generals undertook bold economic enterprises, like the outfitting of a new Spartan fleet under Lysander. In addition, their league included mostly Peloponnesian city-states which were close to it. Thus, they had more food and economic security than the Athenians. The Spartan economy was also relatively secure, as it was in the southern parts of the Peloponnese. Athens managed to threaten the Spartan heartland, and thus its resources, only at times, like when they occupied the island of Cythera in the 420s BCE. But for the most part, Sparta had more secure logistics and deployed them more conservatively. The Lacedaemonians also had another assistance, the might of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. A massive realm spanning from the valleys of the Indus to the sands of Egypt, it had bottomless resources that no Greek could match. The Achaemenids, particularly the satraps of Asia Minor, saw Athens as a threat, and in the 410s were eager to get involved in the war. The wealth of the empire proved to be of vital importance to the Spartans, who managed to outfit their navy. They were thus finally able to match the Athenians in the naval theatre. When combined, Persian resources and Spartan strategic logistical blows gave the Peloponnesians the eventual upper hand and thus victory in the war. There is also the geopolitical factor which impacted the scales of the conflict. This variable lies beyond the mere topic of alliances, but also includes aspects of foreign entanglement and imperialism. One aspect that we have already mentioned is the Persian gambit of siding with Sparta in the 410s BCE. There is more to this geopolitical process than mere economic issues, for Persia itself enabled a multi-front war in the 400s BCE. Besides funding the Spartan fleet, local Persian satraps, such as Tissaphernes, began incursions into Ionian cities allied with the Athenians, that they once controlled as part of the empire in 412 BCE. This succeeded briefly until the Athenian statesman Alcibiades got another satrap, Pharnabazos, to reassert a policy of neutrality. However, the Persians would soon change their minds once again, and in 408 BC they would rejoin Sparta. This time it was Prince Cyrus the Younger who supported this policy, and his contacts with the Spartans promised him help in trying to take the throne from his brother Artaxerxes II. This was an instrumental element in Sparta's success. Athens was now stretched too thin and was more vulnerable to surgical strikes, like the one that would happen in Aegospotamoi in 405 BCE. The decisive factor here was not just economic, but geopolitical. The alliance of Sparta and Persia was capable of disorienting Athens in the war, and made it unable to commit its resources to a decisive blow against Sparta. Thus, they were less able to sustain continued warfare, especially when pitted against two very strong and economically secure allies. On the Athenian front, geopolitics was decisive due to some of the most reckless adventurism the polis undertook. Athens had an expansive and aggressive foreign policy, particularly at sea. Such a strategy was often successful in several instances, such as in the battles of Pylos and Sphacteria in 425 BCE, when the Athenian fleet managed to strike very risky victories that humiliated Sparta in the Peloponnese itself. However, this boldness often led to disastrous consequences. The most noteworthy example is that of the Sicilian Expedition of 415 to 413 BCE. During this ill-fated campaign, the Athenian navy tried to assist the city of Segesta in Sicily by launching a campaign against the local superpower of Syracuse. After 2 years of being bogged down, the Athenians ended up losing almost everyone who embarked on the expedition, with all survivors being enslaved. Part of Athens' failure in this instance was that it was led on by overly ambitious demagoguery. The populist politician Alcibiades was a major instigator of the campaign, even abandoning the campaign when he was accused of sacrilege in Athens. But personalist analyses are not enough in this instance. When looked at more systematically, Athens was simply overextending itself. In its attempt to expand its sphere of influence, the Athenians had simply wasted too many resources in the Sicilian expedition, setting them back for the rest of the Peloponnesian Wars. While the expedition is not the sole cause of Athenian defeat, it did reveal long-term trends in their geopolitical overextension. The Spartans were more cautious, and eventually gained the fabled Persian gold, thus surviving what had become a war of attrition. Another often discussed factor which determined the outcome of the Peloponnesian War was that of internal politics. In any conflict, the stability of a belligerent or its allies is essential for victory. One cannot win a war if they are fighting a civil war. Both Athens and Sparta saw either themselves or their allies fall to political instability throughout the war's duration. Sparta often was very cautious about its military campaigns, on account of the fear of revolts of its underclass of slaves, known as helots. However, the record winner for intra-polis politicking was evidently Athens. The vibrant and agonistic direct democracy could on the one hand be excellent at taking decisions and demonstrating ideological fervor in combat and diplomacy. On the other hand, it was prone to bitter class and political struggle within its agora. Even before the war, men who made the polis beloved of the poets, like Themistocles and Pericles, had faced political rivalries that caused them trouble, and this continued well into the war. For instance, the statesman Alcibiades, whom we mentioned as the mastermind of the Sicilian expedition, was tried in absentia and had to flee to Sparta. A few years later, in 411 BCE, he relinquished his democratic populist branding and helped a faction of oligarchs instigate a coup in Athens. The newly emerging oligarchy was composed of geopolitical realists who undermined the Athenian war effort, thinking it was too costly an affair. However, they failed to achieve even this feat. This was because different factions amongst them had different viewpoints on how restrictive their new form of government ought to be, and delayed actually finishing negotiations with Sparta. Eventually, a democratic movement, with aid from the loyal Athenian ally of Samos, managed to defeat them and restore the people's rule in Athens. This time of troubles set Athens back, only a short time after their defeat in Sicily. While they eventually managed to bounce back, the coup had revealed deep class and policy divisions in Athens itself. Aristocrats, like those who had created the oligarchy of the 400, simply did not think that the war was worth fighting. A supporter of the tyrants may even argue that the restoration of democracy actually stopped an Athenian victory. This is because Alcibiades was considering an alliance with Persia through negotiations with the satrap Tissaphernes that would help them defeat Sparta. Of course, the populist Alcibiades was in a rather precarious communication with Tissaphernes, so this argument is moot. Athens in fact continued to fight and even achieved victories against a Persia-augmented Spartan navy until its grain supplies were cut off in 404 BCE. Whether Athens could have secured a better peace treaty in 411 BCE, or if its doom came after Aegospotamoi in 404 BCE, is an almost impossible question to answer. But what the events do show is that instability in Athens weakened its position against Sparta. Whether one considers an imperialist working-class rabble to have overextended Athens, or tyrannical elites to have backstabbed the revolutionary democracy, it is clear that social upheavals often caused trouble on the war front. Sparta itself likely understood this, as in 403 BCE, they installed the 30 Tyrants after Athens' surrender, a brutal pro-Spartan oligarchy that ruled for 13 months before being overthrown to keep Athens politically subordinate. While not the decisive factor in Athens' defeat, internal strife was a consistent drain on its success. The last factor one could argue was decisive for the victory of Sparta and the defeat of Athens was that of public opinion. This is a factor we briefly touched upon when we discussed the role of alliances, as alliance cohesion and public opinion of the two polis was key in their success or failure. But there is an important distinction, namely how neutral cities saw either polis. After all, to join an alliance without coercion, a state must either consider it beneficial to them or have some ideological affinity for its declared beliefs. Athens at the start of the 5th century BCE was a popular polis in Hellas. It had been seminal in the defeat of Persia and was fighting a war of city-state liberation against Achaemenid imperialism in Asia Minor. Its radical and innovative form of government, giving power to all free males regardless of background or wealth, also seemed lucrative to many Greeks, much like Soviet communism seemed to attract many peoples in the global south in the 20th century. However, much like the Soviet Union, the Athenians lost much of their credibility through some of their actions. The destruction of Melos and the enslavement of its people made Athenians seem bloodthirsty, like the crushing of the Prague Spring in 1968 made the Soviets unpalatable to many. The bogging down in Sicily for Athens made many Athenians and other Greeks see their foreign policy as erratic and resource-draining, much like the 1979 invasion of Afghanistan made the Soviets appear as if they only cared about their sphere of influence. This is why both at the start of and for the duration of the Peloponnesian War, many polis tried to leave Athens' alliance or remain neutral. Sparta, on the other hand, was seen as popular at the start of the 5th century BCE, but too conservative and focused on the Peloponnese to be seen as a model to follow. Sparta managed to present itself as a force of order, defending smaller states from Athenian imperialism, a useful image even if it masked Spartan self-interest. Not all Greeks accepted this framing. Many democratically minded Hellenes saw Sparta as a harbinger of oligarchy and feared its alliance as much as Athenian domination. But Sparta managed to keep its brand, and consequently its alliance cohesion, for longer than Athens kept its image as a democratic vanguard. It only began to be widely seen as imperialist even by its own Peloponnesian allies in the 4th century BCE, when kings like Agis tried to expand Spartan power. Thus, the Peloponnesian War was also a war of public opinion and propaganda, a front that Sparta won due to Athenian bellicosity. So, what can we truly say about the cause of Spartan victory and Athenian defeat in the Peloponnesian Wars? The answer seems to be that Athens both overextended itself and faced an increasingly wealthy Sparta backed by Persia. The war was not predetermined, but what did make it difficult for Athens was how many polis were not positively predisposed towards the state either. Internal disagreements within Athens also played a role, though depending on the situation, different factions overestimated or underestimated Spartan bellicosity. Athens managed to bounce back from tremendous setbacks, such as the Sicilian Expedition. But ultimately, this convergence of factors made Athens lose the Peloponnesian War. Sparta, for its part, was initially cautious and had the favor of many city-states, eventually gaining Persian patronage. The fates of these two cities often turned suddenly both during and after the war. This is perhaps the biggest reminder of the wars. As the tragedian Aeschylus has written, "My friends, anyone with real experience of trouble knows how, when a surge of it comes upon them, they are apt to fear everything, but when fortune's tide is good, they trust that the same breeze will blow favorably forever." More videos on ancient Greek history are on the way. To make sure you don't miss that, please subscribe and press the bell button. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our patrons and YouTube members can watch more than 200 exclusive videos. Join their ranks via the link in the description or by pressing the join button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.